Hello, happy Friday today, and welcome back to our online conversation series. I'm Bayley Mizelle, the Photographic Arts Council's LA's Director of Programming and Communications, and I'm excited to be joined by Adrian Burrell on the occasion of his first and newly released monograph, Sugarcane and Lightning, published by Minor Matters Books. Thank you for joining us today, Adrian.
Thanks for having me.
And a shout out to our friends at Minor Matters Books, Michelle Dunmarsh, all the love. And for those of you joining us for the first time today, PACA-LA is a nonprofit organization whose programming fosters the education, scholarship, and advocacy of the photographic and image-based arts. We are made up of our membership and board of directors who are collectors, photographers, students, educators, and curators. To learn more about PACA-LA and to visit some content shared by Adrian today, please visit the links that I'll include in the chat shortly. Before we get started, I would also like to send a note of gratitude to our board of directors, membership, community partners, and sponsors. Thank you for your ongoing support and commitment to PACA-LA's growth, our programming, and building our longstanding community. We look forward to sharing more with you throughout the year. Just for a brief run of show, and then I'll introduce Adrian, and then we'll hop right into it. We'll have a 40 to 45-minute presentation by Adrian, followed by an open conversation and Q&A. During the presentation, please make sure to use the chat and Q&A boxes for your questions and comments, and we'll get to them during the Q&A session at the end. Quick introduction on Adrian. Adrian L. Burrell was born in Oakland, California in 1990. He's a third-generation Oakland artist utilizing photography, film, installation, and experimental media. His work examines issues of race, class, and intergenerational dynamics, inviting moments where collective storytelling can be a site for remembering. Burrell has lived and worked on 4 continents. He is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran and a graduate of San Francisco Art Institute and Stanford University. At Stanford, he lectured, served as the Black Graduate Student Community Outreach Chair, and was a visiting artist with Stanford's Institute for Diversity in the Arts. He's also a resident at SF Film, was a YBCA Creative Cohort Fellow, and was selected for the renowned Black Rock residency in Dakar, Senegal in 2022. Also, congratulations, Burrell, on your recent acceptance. Can you talk about that really quickly? I just want to shout that out.
Oh yeah, into the UCLA art practice program. Yeah,
big deal, very exciting. So I just want to take a moment to do that. And again, I'm going to bounce it to you now, Adrian. Everyone, I'm going to share some links with you in the chat to access Adrian's book and some other content from him. And we can get started now. I'm going to pass it to you, Adrian, and I'll get back to you at the end of the Q&A.
Great. So I'm going to show you guys a clip from an ongoing film project called The Saint Step in Congo Time. I was very inspired by the research of Dr. Bador Allegra and the writings of Brenda Marie Osby. And yeah, I'll get right into and show you this clip.
Our great-grandfather bought property where nobody else wanted. It was swampland. As soon as they found out that there was oil on it, then they started taking interest in that property. And they got the property by any means necessary. When he questioned them about that property, in that same year he died, somebody said that he was killed. But they took a lot of your humanity.
I ain't scared of you, motherfucker. And I'm black.
And so the film, The Saint Step in Congo Time, is a part of a larger body of work attached to Sugarcane and Lightning. And I like to think of both Sugarcane and Lightning and The Saint Step in Congo Time as a mixtape of Black life and American history from my familial perspective. And so pulling up this PDF to share with you all. Cool. So this is an image from my most recent show, Venus Blues, which was done in Minnesota Street Project's 20,000 square foot space in San Francisco. As I was saying, Sugarcane and Lightning, The Saint Step in Congo Time, it's like a mixtape of Black life and American history from my familial perspective. My grandmother on my mom's side had 16 kids. 12 of those kids had 58. 58 had 112, and 112 had 158. And we all grew up in Oakland. She lived to see all those kids be born. And what I started to do early on is interview my grandmother and really try to get an understanding of the hows, the whens, the wheres, the whys of her migration story out of Louisiana. Her and my grandfather both running from the Ku Klux Klan because they were trying to kill him. And so they got to Oakland and carved out something for themselves in this neighborhood called the Lower Bottoms that was close to the shipping yards where my grandfather and his friends and some of his siblings worked. And so through digging through my grandmother's oral histories, I was able to not only create an archive with her and really try to understand more about her life. I was able to go back to Louisiana and find the oldest people alive in my family, and interview them and get their stories. And when I couldn't go any deeper with them, I was able to go into local and national archives and unearth other materials, birth records, death records, and I was also able to find these letters that were written on behalf of my ancestors who were enslaved by the Confederate Army during the Civil War. And in these letters, they're centenarians at this point, and it's 1932, and they're demanding reparations, to which the government responds, "We don't pay reparations to slaves, their widows, their descendants. Stop writing us." So these are just some images from Louisiana, from both Minden, Louisiana, and Laurierville, where my family's from. And so with this series, there's some of these images were at SF MoMA, a part of a show that I did called It's After the End of the World. Don't you know that yet? And I was working with my grandmother, my mom, and my sister to kind of get at this archetype or this idea of the Black angel of history, these mythical figures that travel throughout time and space to support revolutions and guard the souls of Black folks. And the hair pieces that you see my mom, my grandmother, and my sister wearing, me and my sister collaborated to make them. They're made out of steel wool. And I was interested in this material that had been something that's like how do you say, it's something only meant for an object of utility being turned into something that shined in the light, something that danced in the light, something that did something different than it was originally supposed to do. This is my Uncle John in Vietnam in the 1960s. He was there during the Tet Offensive and spent 3 years in the infantry. And, you know, it's interesting. I think about the letters that I found about my ancestors who were involved in the Civil War, and I think about the photos that I find from World War II and documents from World War I, and even my uncle in Vietnam, and just thinking about these repetitions of catastrophe within American and world history as it relates to my family. So my grandmother, she also had she had over a dozen albums. And while she was still alive, I was able to sit with her and scan every last one of those albums that I can find and go through each image and ask her the who's, the what's, the whens, the where's, the hows of the people in those images. So these are some of her cousins, aunts, and friends. It's my mom, my grandmother in Oakland, California. It's interesting. My uncle Kenny, he passed away, and through documenting and endeavoring to photograph this sprawling network of kin and loved ones, it's amazing sometimes how these images age and what they mean to me at the point that I make them, and what they mean further on down the road. I also like to think about, especially with some of the more speculative or abstract images, so to speak. I like to think about the process of creating with my family as creating this ritual space, this space where we have the power to either deepen a connection or release an energy. And within that space, what I understand is it's become a ritual space basically for me and my family, where we learn to create new language and love each other differently. And it's the part of the practice that, unless you're a collaborator, you might not get a chance to see, but it's one of the most beautiful parts to me, because through the process of organizing the logistics, getting my 94-year-old grandmother, to come be on set with us at 7 in the morning and making the hair pieces with my sister, there's a lot of heat, there's a lot of friction. And what we do with those moments and how we transmute that energy into the image is a process that I've come to love. This is the funeral of my cousin Will in 2014. He was killed in Oakland. And I think that's another part of this work, just digging into the archives and working with family. Uh, Necropolitics becomes very apparent, the ways in which my family and people who look like my family have a closer proximity to death, and how that plays out in a system built on institutional racism. Something I was interested in too is Clyde Woods has a book called, I believe it's Development Drowned. And he talks about blues epistemology in a sense that after slavery, we got Reconstruction. And with Reconstruction, we got the Ku Klux Klan. But with the Ku Klux Klan, we got the blues. And that throughout time, there's these moments where you have a catastrophe, but then you have this generative moment where my people came up with a way to sidestep and or use culture or use refusal and organizing to exercise the parts of being human that the overall superstructure wasn't trying to let them have. So it's like not only dancing death for 500 years and making it look good, but it's like we gonna do us.
Adrian, I actually want to jump in and ask you a question really quickly. You had talked about ritual and creating ritual based off of this project, and even this project naturally developing ritual with your family. But can you talk a little bit about, old ritual versus new ritual? Because you kind of referenced that just now with 500 years of dancing and building, but also what we've come through. So can you talk about like what that might mean to you, old ritual versus new ritual, and how it's developed or reconfigured over time?
Yeah, I think for me, ritual is something that it's like living off the land. It should use the tools that you have at the time to create the energy or the vibes that you want to transmute into an image or into a moment. And it's something that's not prescriptive, and it's something that you have to feel. When I was in Senegal on a residency, we were visiting an art center, and the director told us about a place in he called it like the sacred forest, and he was saying that in this place there are objects and there are rituals that they do that they didn't write things down. They didn't write certain things down and say, hey, this is how you do ABCD, this is how you do it. They said that their ancestors weren't worried about writing things down necessarily because they knew that we would find our way to what we were meant to find our way to. So I guess there's like a faith and there's an improvisation to ritual, and there's a way in which that you collectively create what's destined for you and the people that you're working with at that time. And I think that that's where the magic is, in the collaboration, in transmuting that friction that comes with deciding that this is our desired outcome and this is the way we're going to push and will it forward.
Right, Adrian. Thank you for engaging that. I mean, it references me to like this idea of the manifestation of the body as well when you bring that up, right? But I'll come back to that at the end. I just want to hop in there for that point really quickly. Thanks for engaging that.
Yeah. So I took this image in, I want to say 2019. And I remember at this point, I would go to my grandma's house multiple times in a week. And I remember looking at this chair and just seeing the imprint of her body and seeing the light hitting the chair. And like she had just gotten up. And I just remember thinking that, one day, you know, and she would say, and this is the name of this image, she said, y'all gonna miss me when I'm gone. And when I took that image, I just was able to, I projected myself into the future and I thought about that moment when she would be gone. And I brought myself back to the present, and it made me just appreciate her even more and love her even harder. So I mentioned that I found these letters that were written on behalf of my ancestors who were enslaved by the Confederate Army during the Civil War. And when I dug a bit deeper, I was able to find a bill of sale. And this bill of sale was for one of my ancestors who was kidnapped in northern Senegal in the 1700s and sold to French enslavers in southwestern Louisiana. And in the document, they call her Venus, and they say that she has these tribal markings on her stomach. And so when I went back to Senegal through the Black Rock residency, I was able to go to this area that the document says she was from and really just try to, I talked to diviners, I talked to griots, I talked to culture keepers and locals, and just really try to understand what her life might have been like before the rupture of slavery. This is one of my favorite images. It's called God Don't Like Ugly. And it's of my mother standing at a restaurant that's now closed called Mexicali Rose. And she's standing in front of the police station, which you can't see in this image, but she's standing in front of the police station. And Mexicali Rose was always important for me because whenever we had a family member who had to deal with the system, or when we had to, go visit somebody or go to court, we would always go to Mexicali Rose before and or after, just kind of as this way of getting ready to deal with what came. And so this image being taken, during 2020, during the uprisings, and having my mother holding this gun, not pointing it, but holding it, it's very symbolic for me in that moment and for my experience growing up in Oakland. This image is called The Change in Same. And when I was in Senegal, I actually found I went to a sugarcane plantation where they were still using the slash and burn techniques. And, up at 6 in the morning, seeing these hundreds of people working in the sugarcane field. And it's kind of like the more the more things change, the more they stay the same. It was kind of that kind of moment for me. This is also a part of the installation from Venus Blues, which was at the Minnesota Street Project. And it was a very collaborative effort with a team of 20 people and over 10,000 pounds of soil, locally sourced soil, to make this earth wall. And that the ritual and the process and the energy that was gathered and released during that was definitely something. This image is called Modernity Blues, and it was taken in Laurierville, Louisiana, where I had the family members who were enslaved by the Confederate Army during the Civil War, and people in my family who worked in the sugarcane plantations, or were enslaved on sugarcane plantations rather. And this image is just like, you see me feeling, it's like I've been shot out of a cannon into modernity, carrying these stories and carrying these archives and these rituals with me, and really thinking about what it's like to be initiated into this place of griot, and to be a storyteller, and the weight that comes with. These are some of the letters that I told you about. And yeah, I think also I started to bring myself a lot more into my work. For a long time when I was documenting my family, it seemed like I was going into these archives that can get real dark real quick, and I'm dealing with more funerals than birthdays. And I wanted to do something that allowed my body to transmute all that energy and say things that words couldn't say. And in that performative gesture, there's another language, there's a way of release, there's a ritual. And so for me, self-portraiture and the performativity that comes with that a lot of times is a way to release that energy and to get at something that words and other things just can't.
Adrian, I just want to reference something else here. I'm glad that you went into motion, because one thing for me that I love about your work, especially about this project, is your relationship to motion, and exactly in the ways that you just mentioned, the motion of bodies, Black bodies in motion. So I was curious if you can kind of talk about the distinction between film, video, and image for you. The moments when a video would show the motion completely versus when an image would show the motion still, and what that translation might mean for you depending on the poetics of the moment or whatever you might be developing.
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about in terms of flight and emotion is this idea of freedom being this thing that has to be. I think about Maroonage. And I'm thinking about people who were in flight, and people who had to maintain that flight in order to be free, but they were arguably the freest of the people of that time. And so it's something that I'm definitely thinking about and I'm pondering on in terms of flight and freedom and praxis and what does it mean to be in a constant state of flight
Right.
is something that I've been thinking about.
And also the translation of that space, right? That's the biggest thing for me when it comes to motion or flight, is the translation of that when you're continuing that process or that gesture forward.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for going there again, just hopping in real quick.
No, for sure. This is my mom and my sister from that same series, just after End of the World. Don't you know that yet? And I get back to that. I'm still understanding and chewing on Clyde Wood's idea of blues epistemology and using the blues as a way of not just resistance, but as existing and loving and making as a way of realizing all the aspects of being human. And it makes me, I have some friends who are more what you would call Afro pessimists or would call themselves Afro pessimists. And they would say that there isn't a world for us in humanity because we weren't meant to be human. This system evolved in a way that put a preference on human, and human being mostly white and mostly male. And then I think about Sylvia Wynter, and I think about at least what I know of Sylvia Wynter, and I think about what she says, that there's been an overrepresentation of white males as human, but the project of human isn't necessarily a failed project. We just haven't seen it in its fullest iteration yet. And there's a little bit of hope to that. And that's the slide.
Adrian, thank you so much for your presentation. That was wonderful. I'm going to spend more time with it. As I told you, I went through every page of the book. So I really enjoyed having your background. In the moments when you decided to speak on something or when you didn't, that was also very poignant. I just want to hop right into some thoughts that I had initially as far as image mining and the body or the text and language. I want to first jump into your relationship to language and text and the use of the body at the same time. And when those three are coalescing, when they're not, and also when body language becomes an idea. So I know that's a little vague, but I kind of want to see where you jump in on that.
Yeah, I would say that for me, I remember growing up in Oakland, whenever we would go to like a party or something like that, it was a moment where I would be with my cousins and they would have their guns, and it would be like, all right, well, we can't, I was 15. I'm like, I can't really get comfortable because we don't know when a shootout's going to break out. So it was something where I learned my body had this tension that was kind of like where it lived. There's like a tension in the body.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like I walked around with that tension for a long time. And then even going to the Marine Corps, where they're like, sit up straight, chest forward, shoulders back. There's this tension. And when I was able to get into my art practice deeper, and I was able to explore dance, and I was able to explore movement, there's really these moments that's deeper than words that make you want to cry and laugh at the same time, and you can't explain why. It's just something that isn't meant for verbal language. It's its own thing all the same. And so it's like it's like cutting the body loose. And when I am creating these rituals with family members or even by myself, I'm endeavoring for that. I'm searching for that spirit, the spirit of that moment and what my body wants to do and what it's going to bring back. I'm releasing something, but also something's going to come back with that. So that's how I would talk about performance and movement. And then in terms of text, growing up, I started off with music. I started off wanting to be a rapper, and then I got fed up because everybody was saying that, well, you know, you have to have a chorus and you have to have a hook and it got to be like this. And I was like, man, I don't want to do that. Like I said everything I needed to say in 15 seconds. So that's my song. But then I realized, okay, well, maybe that's more like poetry. So then I started to do poetry because I was like, this is better than, you know, music because I can make it whatever I want to make it. And then that poetry turned into photography, and photography turned into film. And I felt this situation where people were like, hey, you have to specialize. Either you're going to do this, you're going to do this, or you're going to do that. You have to pick one if you're ever going to be great at any of it. And so I said to myself, like, I sat with that actually for a long time, and I felt this impending death of a certain aspect of my creativity because I was like, I have to give up this to pick up that. And then as I really searched through all these different mediums of like how I wanted to express, I said, well, the commonality is that I'm telling a story. So therefore, as long as I'm telling a story, I can tell the story whatever medium I want to tell it. Whatever medium the story demands, that's the one I'll use to tell it.
Exactly.
And so now I've come to a place where there's performance, there's photography, there's film, there's installation. And it's just me trying to stretch myself and stretch my spirit in the story to search for what's in the gaps of the story, if that makes sense.
Completely. And I think that's absolutely necessary for your practice and for storytelling, is to not have the linear or set use of tools that you may be working with or mediums that you're working with. And then back to that idea of the manifestation of the body, like you were saying, you felt them in, but there's multitudes of yourself that were coming and bursting through. You know, you have a page spread in the book, which is a number of like diptychs of you jumping or moving. And it's like a whole page spread. And then there's this quote that I wanted to reference at the same time. This is also within the same subject of the manifestation of the body, and even what you're referencing, storytelling through the body and documenting that. There's this quote on page 34. It was a letter. And for any of you who have the book or know the reference, wonderful. If not, I'll just read it. It was said in a poem. Actually, no, it was in a letter called Dear Future. The writer said, this is not the full picture. And first of all, I love how the texts aren't always, the author is not always written or provided to us. But I like this idea of it not being the full picture. This is not the full picture. And, you know, there are limits to our mediums, right? So can you talk about that? You just mentioned the mediums of being limited as far as your tools, but can you talk about the limits of the mediums that you're using and when you can kind of balance that poetically? Because it's you're so multidisciplinary, and even in the book, it's such a layering of tools. Yeah.
I'm very interested in history. And when I was younger, I asked everybody questions. Anybody who I can find, I ask them a question. An aunt, an uncle, a stranger, whoever, I had a question for you. And I never lost that curiosity. I'm always still asking these questions. And I get to the point where I hit these, maybe it's the verbal wall, but it's not an energetic wall. Or maybe it's a verbal and an energetic wall, but there's something visually about it that I can convey to get at that next bit of feeling or knowing or something like that. And so, what am I trying to say? Basically, you were asking, say your question one more time. I got caught up in I went to a whole moment.
No, that was the point. My question had many moments. I was just talking about through the manifestation of the body. Talk about your experience with these mediums that you're referencing, you know, film, video, poetry, images, and how your book is just a layering of all of those things while you're image mining. So I was just referencing that.
Right. It's like, you know, it's interesting. So sonically, I remember I was in Senegal. And I had been going around and I was like, okay, I'm looking for what's home. I'm like, what's home? So I was in Senegal, and then I went back to Louisiana, and I'm like, go back to Oakland. I'm back in Louisiana. And one day I was in a sugarcane field where my ancestors had helped build a church around 1864 that's still standing. And in the back of that church are the graves of some of my relatives and other ancestors. And I walk over to a sugarcane field and I stick my hand in the soil, and it was humid. It was hot, moist. And I look up in the sky, and a lightning bolt went through the sky, and I said, Sugarcane and Lightning. I said, that's the title of the book.
See?
And then I thought about the sound. I thought about that thunder, and it made me think about timing. It made me think about rhythm. And I was like, the closest I'll ever get to home is the sound of my grandmother's voice. After going from Oakland to Louisiana, back to West Africa, thinking about what does home and place mean for me as a Black person in America. And I thought about the ways in which my grandmother's voice held the timing and the history and the texture of every moment and every person that loved and came before her. And so being able to listen to her voice and being able to riff off that timing, it's a home. It's a home moment. It's not a place. It's the sound of her voice for me. And with that, as I think about the way I orchestrate a scene or the way I put photos together, or think about images, even still images that don't move, I'm always thinking about the sound. I'm thinking about the rhythm and the timing, the gaps and the lack thereof sometimes.
And that's the next part of that letter. I think it said, like, it's not the full picture. There's gaps, and the gaps are like where we are, where we live. That was like kind of the essence of that line. So I'm glad that you referenced that too. We have one question in the chat, but I kind of wanted to keep on that really quickly and go into this idea of this color key. You were referencing blue incredibly, and going through the actual book, you have background tones and colors, blue, silver, and gold. Can you talk about silver and gold and blue and like this key of color that is almost like cultural signifiers in a sense, how you've laid them in and placed them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think with the blues, like I am thinking about the blues. I am thinking about the blues as a way, a blues is a way of having agency and expressing the poetics of Black life and how that comes through in my photos. And with that silver, thinking about the futurity, like thinking about the future, thinking about the future, not necessarily from an Afrofuturist lens, but specifically with the steel wool, thinking about, so working with that steel wool, you cut yourself,
That's
right?
what I know.
We're trying to like braid and like do different stuff with the steel wool, and, it'll cut you, but it also dance in the light. And I think that, yeah, I'll say that.
Yeah. Thank you for referencing that. I knew there were some points there that I kind of wanted to really make sure you engaged here today. So we have a question here from Claire Cunny. Hi, Claire. It's always wonderful to have you. She said, beautiful images and powerful storytelling. Thank you. Who are the artists that have inspired your work?
I would definitely say Dewey Crumpler is a painter, and he was my professor at the San Francisco Art Institute. And he's the one who really got me when in undergrad to start thinking about intersectionality and thinking about the ways in which history stacks on top of each other to create a moment. So a place or a location or a person isn't just that place, location, and moment. They're everything, everyone, every policy that came after it and the ones that are going to come before it. And that just made my brain go like that and have a different understanding of my life, my family's life, my community's existence as it relates to necropolitics and American history and empire. And that, so I would say Dewey Crumpler for sure. And my other inspirations are just really like music. I listen to all different types of music, travel, and coming from a multi-generational family, there was always an art form in the way. It might not be painting or whatever, it'd be in the way somebody say something.
Exactly.
The way my grandmother or one of my uncles say something, it's like a haiku, but it has a bit of wisdom to it. Somebody might say, you think fat meat ain't greasy, don't you?
Yeah.
And I'm a kid. I'm like, what does that mean? Fat? Why would she mean you think fat meat ain't greasy? And that statement in itself it's a prayer and it's a threat at the same time. And those types of metaphors are my inspirations. I draw a lot from my family and growing up in this system of hundreds of people who love me.
Yeah, seriously. I also love that you referenced Sylvia Wynter. That was solid. I was smiling over here for that. So I see another question here. Let me get to it. Seeing the install at PhotoFest was deeply I was deeply impressed with the mindful representation of gun / discussion of being shot / cultural presence, which can be potentially cliche, which you avoided so well. Okay, sorry. Is there a framing that helps to deal with such a polarizing third rail? Interesting. Adrian, you can see this question in the chat as well. I'm gonna try to reread it again. Forgive me, Evans. Seeing the install of Photo Fest was deeply impressed with the mindfulness. Is there a framing that helps to deal with such a polarizing third rail? I'm not sure I understand, but maybe.
Yeah. I believe they're talking about the image of my mother holding a gun in front of Mexicali Rose.
Okay.
And I think that her holding that gun, I think the gesture of her holding it is very important.
Mhm.
The fact that she has it at the ready, but it's not pointed at any particular person. There's this potentiality, there's a choice there, and there's a collective choice to be made there. And there's a way in which humans and people, as we exist, we can't be taking out like everything that we're dealing with. Somebody made a choice to get us here. And we're going to have to make a choice to get us somewhere different.
Hey, that was a good answer to that. I didn't even, thank you for that question, Evans. That was a good question. I also want to throw into another quote here from one of the poems, page 72. The writer talks about black shine refuses your index. I think that all of it you talked about today references that line, but can you speak on that more in depth? Just that part of the poem, black shine refuses your index.
Yeah, it makes me think about, so sometimes I get nostalgic. Sometimes I get nostalgic for the ways that my family in particular used to exist. And we existed in a sense where it's like I said, I got over 20 something aunts and uncles. Everybody's in Oakland. Growing up as a kid, I can go to anybody's house and stay for a few days and vice versa. And there was this a certain type of cohesion. And now that's changed. And sometimes I think we can look at the way something changed and say that, okay, I want that moment back just like it is, but that's not the case because things are always changing and shifting to suit the needs of the time. And so when I say black shine refusing your index, it goes back to that way that we talked about dancing deaf for 500 years and making it look good. Who does that? You know, it takes a certain type of Teflonness and spirit to be able to do that. And with everything that I've like personally seen within my lifetime, within my family, within my community, the ups, the downs, and all that, it's like we always find a way to still shine. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, of course it does. I mean, that's also referenced in the letter about reparations when, whoever wrote back, I'm sorry, I forgot their title, but they're useless, whoever they were. So whatever. They had said, there's no reference to Negroes in the Confederate Army or your husband. So that also plays into this idea of the violence or the powers of the minings or the controllings of indexes, and the references to that encyclopedic knowledge, the access to it, and how you're constantly re-engaging that permission, that space.
Yeah, it's like who gets to exist, who decides who exists and where and how they can exist. And I think that's why it was also important. So it's important for me to make in a lot of different mediums, from performance to photography to think there's things that I've made that can't be shown because they weren't meant to be shown. They were meant to be experienced in this moment, and the fugitivity of that and what that transmutes to my family members and other people that I love is something that they take away with them. So it might seem that going back into that refusing the index, it might seem that there's a lot that I put out for the world to see in terms of it's very personal, but there's also a lot that I'll never say.
Right. Yeah, I got that, Adrian. I love it. I'm big on indexing and this idea of the index. So when I actually saw that.
Never say, never show.
Huh?
Sorry. I said never say and never show. Well, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that that was referenced in the poem, I just really wanted to engage there because that's exactly right. Never say, never show. And there's so many, that's the whole point of this project, ongoing practice that you have is referencing those things, moments of erasure, but also the controllings of those indexes, which we still reference today, right? And then when you're making the publication, and you're putting your family in words, letters from them, you're re-indexing, right? So it's like this regenerative moment collectively. Sorry, I got a little lost for a minute because, like I said, I'm pretty passionate about that idea, and I really appreciate how you answered that question. Let me get back to what I was thinking of. Oh, okay. Next point that I wanted to kind of engage with you is again, it's about the body, but the absence or the presence of the body. Right? So there's some page spreads or moments, even in what you showed us today, where the body isn't present, whether it's a landscape view shed or whether it's the chair where your grandmother was sitting and she's not in that chair at the time, whether she had passed or whether she just hadn't been sitting there in that moment, right? So you talk about the absence or the presence of bodies, whether that's in the content or even physically in life, in your relationship to engaging that.
Yeah, I think in the film, there's this moment where I'm in that graveyard in the back of the church, and I'm sitting on the graves of my ancestors from the last few hundred years, and I think that they're absent and they're present at the same time, and there is a way that history is absent and present at the same time. And for those moments where there isn't an actual body present, I enjoy the idea, like for myself, being able to project those histories and project that spirit into the image and into the frame.
Right. I think that you do that so brilliantly with the use of blue. And then the text that was written in the back, who's referencing like this time that you're talking about with blue and the time of day, you know, the witching hour, or this time of day when the spirit and the body, the presence and the absence are kind of coming together, right? I think you definitely touch on that with this idea of the colors as well that you're referencing. I mean, we're coming up on 4 o'clock here, but I still have another point for you. If we could kind of go there.
Yeah.
So again, you're talking about the absence of the bias. It's the same subject. But with your use of lighting as well, and this like, there was like this figure that you had prepared or constructed that was present in spaces that wasn't a body at all. It was almost like this constructed body itself. Can you talk about that object and its presence throughout the book, but then also, honestly, your use of lighting? I noticed that there's a lot of drapery in some of the portraiture, and I really sense that as a sense of presence and energy and spirit. So can you talk on that just a little bit?
Yeah, so when I found this letter, or rather bill of sale about Venus, and I went back to Senegal, I was thinking a lot about Saidiya Hartman's Venus in Two Acts and the impossibility of telling this story and what that meant. Like I can never speak for my familial Venus. I can never fully feel all the gaps of what it was like to be kidnapped from northern Senegal and brought to Louisiana. And so this kind of vessel that I created and placed in these landscapes of significance as it pertains to her story allows for the mind and for spirit to kind of travel and to try to speculate and to think about what may have been possible and what that means, and playing with the metaphor of the sword or the machete and like the fire that's burning behind Venus in this field of sugarcane in northern Senegal. So that was pretty much that, like me understanding that there is a void, there isn't a body, there isn't a body to put into the frame. There's this void, and what is it like to try to feel and or understand that void?
No, absolutely. And that goes into my last point, Adrian, which is the portrait, right? This use of this, how you engage the portrait, the auto portrait, is incredible. So that's what I considered as Venus, this absence, this presence, how you had learned that they were referencing her as Venus and these markings on her in your absence of ever knowing her history or her future or her present. That was, I felt that was manifest through the portraiture of this vessel that you had been creating.
It was wild because, like I said, in the document, they call her Venus in
Right.
in the document, and then reading Venus in Two Acts by Sadia Hartman, and then being in those spaces, it was a experience.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just on that last note, do you have any points you can make further about this idea of portraiture and your use of portraitures to history or just in this project in general? Because you do talk about the self-portrait, the auto-portrait of yourself, and how that's this freeing moment and you're using emotion when you do it, but also the portrait of the absence. If that, yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say that I'm very interested in employing myth and ways to obstruct the story, and not because if I told the story straight up like it is, I would be exposing certain things in terms of thinking about the index, right? So there's a certain ways that I think when I use myth and use speculation in portraiture, it does something different. And I'm interested in that. And in terms of self-portraiture, going back to this idea of performance and cutting the body loose and documenting that what's captured when I document that, because it's a type of freedom that can't be captured. It's an impossibility. It's an impossible act. What I feel when I perform and create a self-portraiture is impossible to capture in a portraiture. And I'm interested in that tension, and I'm interested in kind of the trickster element of that.
Yeah. Hey, I think that's a good way to end it. I love when you said, the myth, bringing myth into portraiture, the myth of portraiture. That we could sit with that for the rest of today, the rest of the year. I love that, Adrian. So everyone, thank you so much for your comments in the chat. Adrian, thank you for your wonderful presentation and such a long, incredible conversation that we had today. I look forward to following your practice and learning more. Congratulations on your acceptance into the program as well at UCLA. Big deal. Very happy to have announced that today, as you saw me do it a little too early. So yeah, thank you again, Adrian. Do you have any final parting words for anyone in the audience?
Thanks for coming. I appreciate you staying and listening to me go on and on. And yeah, appreciate it.
All right, everyone. We'll see you again soon for the next one. And again, Adrian, please keep me up to date. Send me links and I'll keep our members up to date and share all that you do. And again, much love to Minor Matters Books.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone. Happy Friday.